All right.
Well, there.
Okay. And now with the singles covered, we are going to move into our albums. And Matt, will you run the numbers for our first album of the evening, which is going to be the Tragically Hip?
Yeah, so the Tragically Hips Fully Completely comes in at number 344 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 32 in 1992, number 1,834 of all time. It is the Tragically Hip's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. It did not make Rolling Stone's list, and the Tragically Hip are ranked at number 609 of overall artist rankings. But I think if you were ranking Canadian bands, they would be in the top five, I would probably say, from what,
In
from what I
terms
was
of
able to see.
quality or importance to Canada? Because if it's important to Canada, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's more of that. Well, if you just look up top Canadian band slash artists, they're in, depending on the list that you're looking at, they can crack the top five.
They're like
Yeah.
Canadian REM is kind of like how I sort of read them in terms of what their popularity could be compared to in the time that they were active. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So, do you
go
want to take
first?
the first take? Do you want?
I'll,
I want to
I'll
go?
let you take the first, and I'll take it on the
Okay.
next album. Yeah.
So, Tragically Hip. This is a band that I think I've heard of in name, but that's about it. Didn't know what to expect. Didn't know anything about them. And yeah, this is a pretty much a straight up kind of roots rock type sound, little Americana. It's like a southern rock almost, kind of in the vein of like a Skinnerd, something like that. Kind of very straight ahead, rock. I wouldn't say it's a straight homage to the blues like or blues rock like the Black Crowes, an album that we covered, Shake Your Moneymaker, earlier in this season. This is kind of maybe has a little bit more of a, I don't know if I would say an alternative or a grunge type aesthetic to it that kind of branches. It makes it a little bit different than a Black Crowes type sound. But I did kind of put it in a similar category as them, as being like an album that's certainly not reinventing the wheel or anything like that, but is kind of a very solid, straight ahead rock and roll album. I would probably say that I did like I think the Black Crowes sound was better than this, was more interesting and more appealing to me. I think I don't know. I don't know if I will. This album kind of ran together for me a little bit, a little samey, and I'm wondering if more listens would kind of help me to differentiate some of the songs a little bit more. I I probably only listened to it 3 times, I think, but I did enjoy it. I think I like the guy's voice, and I'm trying to think, the lead singer is Gord Downey, who I believe did pass away back in 2017.
Yeah, it's kind of a sad story. He had like a brain tumor, I think, and they did a final tour.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't think they're kind of around anymore. They once that happened, they packed. I believe that's what happened. They kind of packed it up. But yeah, I think that just generally speaking, I thought there was a decent mix of kind of more upbeat songs or more introspective songs. Like Hammer was an example of a song that was kind of, they slowed it down a little bit, but I did like that song a lot. I thought 50 Mission Cap was an interesting song, and it led me to kind of look up what the meaning was, because they talked about a guy scoring goals and winning the Stanley Cup, and then he like disappeared, and I'm like, what the hell are they talking about? So I did look that up, and that, yeah, sure enough, it was based off of a story that the band was trying to get more, was trying to give this guy more notoriety. His name was Bill Barlico. Barlico, I think his name is. So I didn't know anything about this guy, but he basically was a hockey player who died on his way to a fishing trip. He flew on a plane, and the plane crashed, and they never knew where he was or what. And they didn't find his body till 11 years later when Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup again. So I'm like, well, that was an interesting story. I didn't know anything about that, but they certainly I think that they got like a partnership struck up with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they play that song at Maple Leafs games, and there's some sort of relationship that they established there. So I thought that was an interesting story, but overall a very solid rock and roll album. And again, it's one of those things that's not reinventing the wheel. I bet you, I'm curious to hear, John, your takes on the lyrics as overall. While I picked up on some of them here or there, it's not my full focus. So I'm venturing to guess that the lyrics are pretty solid. It just strikes me as that would be the case for this for some reason. But yeah, for an artist that I never really heard before, I was I'm pleasantly surprised, I guess. So yeah, I am a thumbs up on this record.
Yeah, just to go at the lyrics are good. They're decidedly Canadian, which there's like a overwhelming Canadianness like in the narrative that the
Okay.
best thing I compare it to is remember we talked about the Kinks and where like the lyrical content of this is extremely British, like
Yes.
almost a barrier to it. And I wrote down it's like the Kinks and like Midnight Oil, right? Was decidedly Australian,
Australian. Yeah.
right? And so like this is the Canadian version of that. Whereas a band like Rush, there is a Canadian sensibility if you know their personality, but when they're going into their objectivism, type themes, you wouldn't
Ayn
immediately
Rand.
identify
Yeah.
them as Canadian, right? It's just sort of
Yeah.
they could be from wherever, right? England,
Right.
America, whatever. Despite the fact that they're famously Canadian. This is Canadian, all the way down to like a player from the Leafs, the Wheat Kings, right? There's just a lot of references to, the first song, right? Courage for Hugh McLennan. There's these parables, which God bless them, they're Canadian. I think that's why they appeal to the Canadian sensibility because there's these songs that are there. I got a little bit of like Gordon Lightfoot from this album, a little bit in sensibility, in terms of thematically the lane that it exists in. There's also a little bit of Bob Seger, maybe not sonically, but vibe, right? Where
Hmm.
they're sort of speaking to the same audience, but those others might be speaking to the American version of it, and these guys are speaking to the Canadian version of it. The production on this album is just insanely clean,
Hmm.
which I don't know if that's a compliment or a criticism. I think it depends on the song. Like certain songs, like The Wherewithal, benefit from the cleanliness of it, and other songs, like Fully and Completely, for my opinion, don't benefit from it as much. Um, but certainly lyrically, I was curious, and like you, I dug into the mythology of some of these songs because there is a little bit of a mythology in many of these songs. Or what's this story about? Like
Hmm.
locked in the trunk of the car, right? I was like, what is this about? You know what I mean? And it was interesting to read the stories of where it came from, and they seem to have a little bit of a ripped, not ripped from the immediate headlines, but ripped from the mythology. Some pop culture, some current events, stuff like that with their lyrics, which I appreciated. For me, the music just never got above average for me.
Hmm.
It just, I don't, the blend together thing is somewhat fair. I always try to put it in, compared to something like Toad the Wet Sprocket that we covered last week. I just felt Toad the Wet Sprocket had hooks that appealed to me more and a little bit more musically interesting stuff to me. I know what you're saying about Americana. I didn't get like a Southern rock vibe at all. I got a little bit of folk rock depending on the song. I got a little bit of modern indie rock, 90s indie rock. I got a little bit of straight ahead alternative rock. Um, but not all in the same song. This, to me, even though it was samey, there were songs that the I liked a lot more than I liked Courage. I liked Locked in the Trunk of a Car, and I liked The Wherewithal quite a bit. There were other songs that I wasn't as high on. We'll Go To sticks out to me. At the
Hmm.
100th Meridian definitely took me a little bit into that vibe of They Might Be Giants that I don't love too
Oh.
much. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about
It's not
this
so
one.
good, Al.
If you'd
Yeah.
talked to me after At the 100th Meridian, I would have been like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to like this album. But it did kind of reinvent itself. I'd have to say thumbs in the middle on this one for me. If I had to put it one way or the other at the Meridian, I'd put it slightly going down on the Meridian. So, it just didn't stay with me like other
Yeah.
albums did. And I won't say it was generic, but I won't say that I listened to this and said I want to re-listen beyond I think I listened to this 3 times this week. But the 3 times I listened to it, I felt like I'd completely digested it and gotten the totality of the album.
Yeah.
So that's my take.
Yeah, that's fair. And generic was a term that came to my mind, especially in the very beginning. I was like, huh, this is kind of run of the mill, rock music. It's kind of just it does have that little bit of that 90s feel, kind of a more generic sound. The more I listened to it, the more I kind of saw more of the roots rock kind of thing, which maybe elevated it a little bit. Yeah, it's but for being like this amazing band from Canada, and this is their best album, you know,
Had a little
th-
verve pipe to me, like verve pipe or
which is
sponge, you know,
yeah,
like
which
kind
is
of,
kind of a generic sound,
yeah.
a little bit, so yeah, which does resonate a little bit with what I was saying. It's kind of like it's a little bit more of a grunge alt rock kind of core rather than a blues rock Stones kind of core. So yeah, I see what you're saying. There's not a ton of hooks or memorable like songs I walked away with like, wow, I'm going to be singing that one for a while. It was pleasant enough, and I, my thumbs up is kind of just as a general vibe that I got throughout the record. But yeah, it's probably more in line with the average, maybe slight thumbs up if it be a little bit more specific. But yeah, it's a serviceable roots rock album, I would say.
Yeah, I must say that a little bit of a barrier for me was I did not love the lead singer's voice. It wore
Okay.
on me as the album went on a little bit. But what brought it back was I did like there were guitar parts I liked, especially the lead guitar, and I did like the lyrics. The lyrics did interest me.
Hmm.
So that's what took it above a not recommend to a middle of the road. So I don't know if it makes me want to listen to more Tragically Hip. Um,
Hmm.
what would you say? With this album, would you want to search
I'd
more
give
into?
another. I'd give another one a whirl. Like there's certainly, yeah. I would probably see if there's anything else, that they would have in store. They've got I think they've got a ton of
They
records.
do.
So I don't want to just,
They
you
were a
know,
big freaking deal in Canada. Like a
yeah.
big deal. Yep.
I'm just wondering if they deviate at all. I mean, their second highest rated album is Day for the Night,
Hmm.
or I'm sorry, Day for Night, which was in '94, and then the Up to Here was in '89. So those are their top three on best ever albums, and
I'm
you
listening
know,
to their number one single on Spotify, a song called, it looks like Bob Kagan. Bob Kajan. It's
mhm.
all sort of one word. It is in the same lane as what we listened to.
Okay.
A
Yeah, it
little
could
bit.
be. I mean,
It
it
could
would.
fit into this album.
Okay. Yeah. And I don't know. I might try. I might try another album here or there, but yeah, it wasn't like mind blowing or anything like that. It was, it was. I think depending on like there was like one time I listened to it, I was like really feeling it, and another time I was kind of like not feeling it as much, and I'm like, well, that was interesting. But I still think there's enough here for me to to give it a slight recommend, or
Yeah.
just to be aware of like if this is a big band in Canada, like it's
Mhm.
it's pretty decent. And I think that they would probably be a fun band to see live too. They seem like a good bar band or a band to see live too.
Yeah, their second biggest song is Wheat Kings, which is on this album, which
Yep.
I thought was a very average song for there
Very
being their
okay.
big hit on
Yeah.
it. It didn't, there were other songs where I thought they would have been the singles. There were something like six singles off this album, though,
Yeah, there
in
was.
Canada. Yeah.
Yep.
New
6.
Orleans is Sinking is the blues you're looking for, Matt. It's definitely a
Okay.
bluesy song, and probably of the three that are their top three, it sounds like the one I'd like the most. I'll just end with this. Great band name. Tragically Hip's a really cool
Yeah.
band name. So
It
I'll
is.
give them that for sure.
Yep.
Right up,
Very-
right up there, like in terms of peak band names. That's a great band name. I always thought Sonic Youth, I mentioned before, I thought was
That's a
like a
good
pretty
one. Yeah.
fantastic band name. So yeah, there's just certain ones I always like to point out if somebody really
Yep.
nails. Yeah, great band name. So
Well, John,